Hello, I'm Lamisila Pamela Ngubane, and this is the Entity Dynamics podcast. Entity Dynamics is a culture development consultancy where we believe that culture creates behavior and behavior creates reality. We work with civic and social organizations to help them create a culture change in the communities in which they are working so that the interventions that these organizations have initiated will actually stick and become part of the social fabric of those communities. Too many times you see well-meaning people come into communities seeking to help, only to find that their efforts are wasted because those interventions fizzle out as soon as they've left. And this is because the communities have not assimilated the culture of the organizations that are launching those interventions. So Africa is in need of a culture makeover. Why? Well, as we can see, we have a lot of problems in this country, and no one seems to know how to solve them. For 30 years, the government, led by the African National Congress with its alliance partners, the Congress of South African Trade Unions and the South African Communist Party, have been decrying the legacy of apartheid and colonialism as being the reason behind the persistent issues of unemployment, inequality, and poverty in this country. Now, I don't believe that these issues are insurmountable, but our government obviously seems to, because 30 years later, they're saying it's exactly the same problem, and things have gotten worse for a lot of people. And this is why you'll sometimes hear people saying things were better under apartheid. Well, I believe that South Africa needs a culture makeover because a culture has been established in this country, which is the root of our problems. Now, culture is defined by Peter Burke, a historian specializing in cultural history at the University of Cambridge, as a system of shared meanings, attitudes and beliefs, and the symbolic forms, i.e. performances and artifacts in which they are expressed or embodied. The issue of South Africa is one where we see, because of the adoption of the ideology of socialism, the establishment of a culture of dishonesty in South Africa. I believe that the culture of dishonesty is why we have these problems. I also believe that socialism, because it doesn't work, requires a culture of dishonesty to be established in order for people to keep fooling themselves and others that it's going to somehow bear fruit. It won't, it hasn't, and it never will. This is because, as Mary N. Rothbard points out, socialism goes against human nature. Human beings work for themselves and for their families and for their communities in that order. But socialism, egalitarianism, wants you to work for your community first and put yourself and your family last. That's not how we are as human beings. Therefore, it's not going to work, and it hasn't worked. Now, socialism also requires it engenders, it doesn't require, it requires dishonesty, but it engenders a culture of victimhood. And I believe that dishonesty and a culture of victimhood are at the core of why we have these problems in South Africa. If you're not going to take responsibility for your actions, if you're going to put people who aren't qualified for the job in positions of responsibility, you're going to have chaos. And this is what's happened. So socialism was adopted in South Africa after World War II, particularly at the Pan-Africanist Congress in Manchester, UK, where Africans from the continent and the diaspora came together to discuss how to overthrow the colonial powers in Africa, as well as how to chart a way forward for Africa once colonizers had left. Dr. George Ayete, a economist from Ghana, says that the Africans believed that colonialism was the mother of capitalism, based on what Karl Marx had said, that colonialism is the ultimate expression of capitalism. And so the African leaders at Manchester and in subsequent years reiterated the same thing, that if they were going to defeat colonialism, they were going to have to oppose it by adopting socialism. Because while colonialism was a daughter of capitalism, they obviously imagined that liberty would be the daughter of socialism. However, it created absolute chaos, because socialism is not a system of economic development. It's not. And if you're not a system of economic development, you're not going to develop any economic production capacity in your society whatsoever. And I think because of this, because it wasn't going to work, you have to find ways of hoodwinking people into believing that the reason why things aren't working is because there's some sort of outside force that's not allowing you to progress. And this is why they have to have a culture. They have to establish and use a culture of victimhood in order to convince people that the reason why we're not going forward is because someone from the outside doesn't want us to succeed. And obviously, that boogeyman would be the West and white people in general. So, in the establishment of a culture of dishonesty and in the establishment of a culture of victimhood, Africans in sub-Saharan Africa, in South Africa, have not been able to come around to doing the things that need to be done. If you look at sociology, in sociology, there are two main theories that explain how societies work. The one is functionalism and the other is conflict theory. Functionalism says that social institutions, primarily the family, the school, and the church or religious institutions, are there to reproduce the civilization for the good of the civilization and for the progress of the civilization and the people within that civilization. On the other hand, the conflict theory, which is informed primarily by Marxism, says that society is structured in such a way as to benefit the elites at the expense of the ordinary people. And so this creates conflict between the elites and the people. But within the ordinary people, there's also those who work with the elites, are co-opted by the elites in order to further their own selfish interests at the expense of the majority. So this frame of thought is what took root in Africa with the adoption of socialism and Marxism as the ideology which would underpin economic development policies, political structuring, and the social engineering and social development of sub-Saharan African countries, including South Africa. Now, if you're going to have a worldview that says there's always someone oppressing you and that everything is geared towards your oppression, you hear it from generation to generation, you're going to start to believe it. Therefore, what this does is that it makes institutions that should be helping people to go forward, as the functionalists say they're supposed to, become enemies to the society. Therefore, traditional marriage will be seen as a form of oppression. Therefore, schools will be seen as places of oppression, not as places of learning so that you can actually better your life. Churches and religious institutions will likewise be seen as places of oppression instead of places where you learn to actually exist in this world according to the laws of the creator of this world. And so you have a situation where chaos essentially reigns because anything goes. Everyone is a master of their own reality, and unfortunately, this doesn't work because reality is reality, whether you think it should be one way or the other. And so I believe that this culture of dishonesty that socialism relies upon is very much pervasive in South Africa, and it needs to be uprooted, because without that, then you won't be able to identify the problems that we have. And I'll talk more about this in later podcasts as what are the problems that we have, and why is it important to be honest about them? Because anyway, we all know, if you have a problem, if you're overweight, like I am, unfortunately, you have to stop eating so much. You have to exercise some more, or if you smoke too much, or if you smoke at all, you need to stop. Thank God I stopped smoking. but you need to figure it out. You need to stop. Why are you addicted to this thing? So similarly, if we're going to deal with poverty, inequality, and unemployment in South Africa, we need to be honest. Why are these things here? Let's not lie to ourselves and say it's because the colonialists did ABC or the apartheid people did ABC. No, it's because we did certain things which aren't working. Likewise, the victim culture, which is also, in many respects, a dishonest framing of the problem that says we are like this because of someone else. The other problem with victim culture is that when you're a victim, nothing can ever be your fault. A victim can do anything to defend themselves. So if you're a victim, you're also always in a defensive position, and you can even kill to defend yourself if you're a victim. And so if you're a victim and you steal the money from the state, well, I'm a victim. This is why I did what I did, because, apartheid deprived me of the ability to reconnect with my ancient African spirituality, which would have taught me the morals of Ubuntu. And therefore now I'm a crass materialist and I have no morals because of someone else. So obviously, the dishonesty and the victim culture go together. Obviously, there are people who are victims. There are real victims in this world, obviously, and they are entitled to defend themselves. They are entitled to help. They are entitled to the state using its resources to help them. But you're not a victim when you're in government. When you're in the union buildings running the country, you're not a victim. There's nobody you can blame for your corruption and your pathetic inability to do your job. And your lack of education is because you're dishonest enough to pretend that just because you feel inclined to do a job, it means you are capable of doing it. This is what's happened. When I was growing up in KZN, my father was a doctor, and he told me that in 1994, when apartheid came to an end in South Africa, the head cleaner in Gwelezana Hospital was made into the hospital manager. Why? Because she was a shop steward for the union of the workers there. And so because she was a good politician within the framework of her communist trade union, they put her in that position of responsibility because apparently knowledge just, I don't know, it's like a free-for-all or something. You don't actually have to go to school to learn. You see the culture of dishonesty. And then if you come and you say, this is inappropriate, oh, you can't say that because she's a victim of apartheid, so she deserves the chance, to do this job. Now, these people also will say something like, if she had educated and skilled people around her, she could have been able to keep that job. The problem is this: if you're the manager, you have to be the one who tells those skilled people what to do. And if you don't know what needs to be done in terms of running an organization or an institution, you're going to create havoc and a mess. And that's what's happened. And it's happened across the board in South Africa. You've had people being put as chairmen and chairwomen of state-owned enterprises who were absolutely ill-equipped, and the things went under, So this culture of dishonesty, buttressed by a culture of victimhood, is really something we need to think about, we need to deal with, and we need to uproot. So I'm talking about that, and also talking about how do we do this cultural makeover? How do we uproot the culture of dishonesty, the culture of victimhood, and establish a culture which takes us away from socialism, because that's at the core of this. Takes us away from socialism, takes us towards free market economics, liberal principles of ordering our society, that are underpinned by a culture of honesty, self-responsibility, and individual liberty. Because these then will create a culture of meritocracy. No more jobs for pals, no more jobs for the loudest voice in the party committee caucus, a respect for private property, so that we stop saying things like, oh, if we had land and if we could just take the land without compensation, then everything would be fine. Once again, dishonesty and victimhood. There's a lot of people who've been given the option to get land back, because sometimes it hasn't actually followed the train of thought of directly being stolen. But maybe there was a conquest and they were moved off the land, and that's another thing we need to talk about, is the fact that when did conquest suddenly stop being legitimate? Because it's been done. It's been done. I'm Zulu. My ability to have a prominent position in the social system of South Africa because of my Zuluness is because of conquest. Shaka Zulu conquered other people and made the Zulu Empire. But suddenly, somehow now, people's land was taken because of conquest. I mean, where do you start turning back the clock, So I think we need to talk about that. It's not a nice thing to say, obviously, because people get very offended when you say things like that. But I think it's also part of establishing a culture of honesty. Let's just talk about things honestly, So you'll have people who take money instead of land because they want money. They don't want land. Some people don't want land. Not everyone wants land. Not everyone wants to be a farmer, whatever you do with the land that you have. And most people don't even know what to do. Some people get farms, they don't even know what to do with them. Okay. So this is another thing. We really need to talk about the land issue and what it's about, actually. So, when you have this culture of free market economics, liberal values, honesty, self-responsibility, then we've got meritocracy that comes out. We've got a respect for private property that comes out. No more theft, no more justifying criminality. The taxes of the people that the corrupt politicians steal are literally people's private property that they've given to the state through legal means, of course. But, it's also an agreement with the state that we give you this, you take care of us. And then also, very importantly, we will then become a society that also values education. And in fact, we need to instill a culture of valuing education and valuing hard work because we don't have that, and this is something which is part of the liberation movement and part of the culture that comes with socialism. And I think it's very important to say that within the global south, there are countries like Rwanda and Singapore that have followed the path of free market capitalism and liberal theory, and they're reaping the rewards. Of course, there are issues with their democracy, which is an important thing to also think about, that has to be dealt with, because without strong democratic institutions, and if everything is all concentrated on one group or one person, then it means that does the society actually have that culture, or does that culture reside only in those people? So it's very important that culture actually resides within the society if it's going to be able to, in the long term, take the country and the society forward. So thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. I look forward to making more episodes. And if you want to learn more about us, please check me out on social media at Entity Dynamics 24 on Twitter. And please like, share, and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Bye.